The wind on Varys 4 was sharp enough to slice through fabric and flesh alike, a constant, howling presence that scoured the wide basin where the shooting competition had been staged. Towering floodlights carved cones of cold illumination through the driving snow, casting the arena in a pale, unnatural glow. The seats, packed with spectators from dozens of worlds, formed a jagged horseshoe around the range. They leaned forward despite the chill, anticipation buzzing through the air. In the galaxy, few things drew as much attention as a marksman's accord demonstration. Fewer still promised the public humiliation of an upstart species. On the commentator's platform, a tall Velrothi, his crystalline skin refracting the lights into cold shards of color, gripped the rail with two of his four hands and raised a microphone with the others. His voice boomed in flawless trade common, each word resonant with calculated mockery. Today we welcome competitors from the finest militaries in the Alliance, and from a modest blue world at the edge of the spiral arm, humanity's best. His mouth formed a slow, deliberate smile, the Velrothi version of a smirk. Let us hope their reputation with primitive projectiles proves entertaining. The crowd rippled with laughter, clicking mandibles, hissing gills, and throaty alien chuckles mixing into an unkind chorus. They had been primed for this moment by weeks of Holocaust teasers promising to pit sleek galactic technology against Earth's heritage ballistics. The implication had never been subtle. Commander Elias Trent walked onto the range with his shoulders squared and his jaw locked. His uniform was thick with insulation, yet he still felt the cold creeping in at his wrists and neck. A standard-issue Earth Defense Force rifle rested across his back. Not the cutting-edge precision railguns of his competitors, but a clean, functional weapon that looked anachronistic here among energy rifles and particle lances. He kept his eyes forward, refusing to acknowledge the snickers drifting down from the stands. The competition began with spectacle. A Trashian marksman, his 6 eyes blinking in coordinated pairs, shouldered a plasma rifle that hummed with restrained power. The bolt he unleashed seared across the snow, striking a target drone with a blinding green flash. The crowd roared approval. A Sithri sharpshooter followed, her beam pistol lancing through the blizzard with uncanny accuracy, each hit punctuated by bursts of ionized vapor. Shot after shot, the aliens demonstrated weapons whose power made mockery seem redundant. When his turn came, Elias stepped forward to the firing line. An attendant handed him a different rifle, bulkier, older, the sort of model Earth had retired years ago. Its optics were misaligned, a flaw so slight it might be missed by an untrained eye. He knew better. They wanted him to fail. The target was a stationary drone, its metal skin half buried under wind-blown snow 300 meters away. Elias dropped to a knee, cradled the rifle, and tried to correct the sights in the few seconds allowed. The cold bit into his fingers. The wind gusted, throwing a fine sheet of ice into his face. He exhaled, squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the frigid air and missed wide, vanishing into the snow beyond the drone. For an instant there was silence. Then the Velrothi announcer bent double, laughing so hard the floodlights glinted from the facets of his crystalline ribs. The sound system amplified the laughter, feeding it into every corner of the arena. A bold attempt, the announcer said when he could speak again, but perhaps the humans' weapons require closer targets. The crowd joined in, some stamping their feet in mock applause. Somewhere in the back of the stands, a cluster of spectators mimed clumsy aiming stances, exaggerating their misses for the cameras. In a galaxy where information traveled faster than light, Elias knew the footage was already being clipped, captioned, and transmitted to every corner of the network. He stepped off the firing line without protest, face impassive, though heat coiled in his chest. The humiliation wasn't just personal, it was aimed at Earth itself. The Alliance had tolerated humans since their admission, but never taken them seriously as equals. This was proof, broadcast and archived, that humans belonged at the fringe. By the time Elias returned to his quarters on the orbital station above Varys 4, the memes had already reached Earth. Alien commentators replayed the miss with overlaid graphics of prehistoric hunters throwing stones. Human analysts, chasing favor, joined in the laughter. It was, Elias realized bitterly, not a misunderstanding, but a performance. They had staged it to bury Earth's credibility. On Earth, however, the reaction burned hot and fast. Military veterans condemned the stunt in harsh broadcasts. Citizens flooded official channels demanding a response, and political leaders convened an emergency session of the Defense Council. The challenge had been public. The answer would have to be just as visible. In the secure depths of the council's meeting chamber, Admiral Keiko Harada replayed the competition footage without sound. Her gaze stayed fixed on Elias's miss, not in judgment of him, but of the insult itself. This wasn't just sport, she said to the circle of commanders and ministers. They chose the location, the conditions, and the equipment. They engineered the loss. General Vasquez tapped the tabletop, and they issued their challenge before the cameras cooled. A formal marksman's accord test, one shot against the target of their choice. Winner claims the right to demand terms from the losers. Terms they assume they'll dictate, Harada said. But that's where we surprise them. Her eyes swept the room. Not a team, not a committee. One shooter. The best we've ever had. The name that followed was spoken almost reluctantly, as though the air itself should not carry it far. Ghostwind. For a moment, no one spoke. Ghostwind's record was a tapestry of rumor and classified reports. Shots taken across distances considered impossible. Targets eliminated in conditions that defied physics. Missions so precise that the only proof they'd occurred was the absence of a threat afterward. Few in the room had met him, and those who had knew better than to call him a myth. Is he still in contact? Vasquez asked. Harada nodded once. He's retired, but he'll answer. When the call went out, the reply came within the hour. No hesitation, no negotiation. Just 3 words, spoken in a voice as calm as if he were ordering coffee. Send the details. The council moved quickly. The challenge was accepted, and the Alliance broadcast the schedule for the next attempt. Same arena, same conditions, but a far more dangerous target. An Arrivos-class war drone, armored, shielded, and in motion. The odds were so poor the alien commentators had already begun scripting their victory speeches. News of the human champion spread faster than the original humiliation. Alien media called it an act of desperation. Even some humans doubted the choice, murmuring that a single man, however skilled, could not erase the sting of public ridicule. But in the corners of Earth's military, in the quiet spaces where operators whispered about impossible missions, there was a flicker of something else. Confidence. Elias heard it in the tone of the officers who briefed him. They didn't talk about if Ghostwind could do it. They talked about how he would. Still, Elias couldn't shake the memory of the alien laughter, and part of him wondered whether the galaxy was capable of believing in a victory even if it happened before their eyes. On the station above Varys 4, the wind howled endlessly against the hull. Somewhere deep within the secure hangars, a ship was being readied for a solitary passenger and a rifle that had never been bested by weather, distance, or deceit. Ghostwind's arrival was not announced. There were no press holos, no public greetings. Just a man in a worn coat, stepping aboard without ceremony, his weapon case held in one hand. Elias caught a glimpse of him through the observation glass as the boarding ramp retracted. Ghostwind didn't look up, didn't scan the arena's distant lights, didn't seem to acknowledge the eyes on him. His presence was quiet but solid, the way stone stands in the path of a river. The ship lifted into the storm, engines muffled by the snow. In a matter of days, the arena would host the second match, the one the Alliance expected to be the final nail in Earth's pride. Elias found himself staring after the departing craft until it was gone, the taste of cold air still sharp in his lungs. The humiliation remained, but for the first time since stepping off the range, it was joined by something else, a faint, unfamiliar pulse beneath the anger. Hope. Ghostwind sat in the dim confines of the transport's cabin, the muted hum of the ship's engines steady beneath his boots. Outside the narrow viewport, Stars streaked into elongated trails as the vessel rode the folds of faster-than-light travel. The glow painted faint lines across his weathered face, though his eyes remained fixed on the rifle laid out on the table before him. It was not the gleaming precision machinery of alien arsenals, but a weapon shaped by decades of refinement, its steel and polymer marked with faint scratches, each a memory of a shot taken and a mission completed. He ran a cloth along the barrel with meticulous care, feeling for imperfections invisible to the eye. Every movement was precise, deliberate, the kind of economy born from thousands of hours in the field. For Ghostwind, preparation was not ritual, it was necessity. The slightest flaw could shift a bullet's path by millimeters, and millimeters decided whether a target lived or died. The mission briefing played again on the wall-mounted display, its crisp holographic projection showing the windswept plains of Varys 4. The competition's location was deliberately chosen. Temperatures hovered far below freezing. Winds shifted without warning, often reversing direction mid-gust. The air was denser than Earth's, altering ballistic performance. The target, the announcer's voice droned, would be an Arrivos-class war drone, armored in reactive plating, capable of shifting position to throw off aim, and equipped with defensive countermeasures. He muted the display and leaned back, recalling his time in training. Not the formal drills of the academy, but the years that followed, the desolate ridges where he learned to predict wind currents by the way snow curled off rock, the coastal cliffs where salt spray and fog distorted sight lines, the sandstorms that buried landmarks in minutes. Nature, he had learned, could be a far crueler opponent than any enemy soldier. A soft chime signaled the approach of another passenger. Commander Elias Trent stepped into the cabin, wearing a heavier jacket than before, his expression taut. He had been ordered to accompany Ghostwind as liaison and witness, though it was clear he felt his own role in this challenge had ended with that first disastrous match. For a moment, neither man spoke. The cabin was filled only with the steady hum of the ship and the faint rasp of cloth on steel. "You've seen the footage," Elias said finally. It was not a question. "I've seen it," Ghostwind replied without looking up. "They'll be expecting failure. They've already turned this into a spectacle. They'll measure every move you make, waiting for something to ridicule." Elias hesitated before adding, "They won't fight fair." "They never do," Ghostwind said, setting the cloth aside. He picked up a small metal tool and began adjusting the rifle's optics. The glass inside was free of digital overlays, no range-finding reticles or automated compensation algorithms. In a galaxy that trusted machines to make decisions, his scope was entirely analog. "Why not use the tech?" Elias asked, watching the older man's hands work with steady precision. "Because they'll try to break it," Ghostwind said. "You can't jam a calculation you keep in your head. You can't hack muscle memory." He tightened a final screw, checked the movement of the adjustment knobs, and set the rifle down. The more you rely on a system, the more you give your enemy a handle to grab. Elias leaned against the bulkhead, studying him. "You've done this kind of thing before." "More times than I've told anyone," Ghostwind said, his voice even. "The trick isn't just hitting the target. It's knowing which variables matter and which are distractions. The aliens will flood the range with decoys, wind generators, thermal mirages, radar pulses. I'll ignore all of it." The conversation lapsed into silence again. Outside, the starfield shimmered and bent as the ship adjusted course. Elias's gaze drifted to the rifle, its long barrel gleaming in the low light. "If you succeed," he said quietly, "you'll be remembered. Maybe more than you'd like." "I'm not here to be remembered," Ghostwind replied. "I'm here to end a conversation." They reached Varys 4 on the 5th day. The docking bay's blast doors opened to a world of blinding white and shrieking wind. Snow scoured the landing platforms, piling in drifts against the bulkheads. The air was sharp with cold, each breath like a blade in the lungs. Alien workers in insulated suits moved cargo between shuttles, their voices muffled by the constant storm. Ghostwind stepped down the ramp with his rifle case in one hand, eyes scanning the horizon. The arena lay several kilometers to the north, a broad depression in the ice ringed by armored seating for spectators. High above it, massive floodlights were mounted on towers to pierce the perpetual blizzard. In the temporary barracks, the other competitors were already present. He passed through a room where a six-eyed Trashian adjusted the calibration on a plasma rifle that hummed faintly in the cold. A Sithari sharpshooter, her armor etched with ceremonial markings, was practicing rapid target acquisition with a beam pistol that could pierce steel at 200 meters. Conversations halted as he entered. Several pairs of alien eyes followed him, some with curiosity, others with open disdain. The Velrothi announcer from the previous match appeared at the far end of the room, surrounded by a cluster of assistants. He caught sight of Ghostwind and grinned broadly, crystalline skin refracting the light. "Ah, the human legend," he said, his tone dripping with amusement. "Have you come to entertain us again?" Ghostwind didn't respond. He walked past the group and found an empty bench, setting his rifle case down with care. The announcer's voice followed him. "We've prepared a very special challenge for you, the kind that separates the dreamers from the dead." Elias appeared beside him, lowering his voice. "They'll try to rattle you before it begins. Don't let them. They can talk as much as they want," Ghostwind said, snapping open the case. Inside, the rifle rested in a bed of foam, its matte finish absorbing the light. He checked each component methodically, ignoring the murmurs from across the room. Later, he walked alone to the edge of the arena for a preliminary inspection. The wind here was unpredictable, curling between the stands and sweeping across the open plain. He crouched, scooping a handful of snow, letting it sift through his fingers. The flakes danced differently, depending on the direction they fell. Information he filed away without conscious thought. His gaze lifted to the far end of the range where a small metallic shape glinted under the lights. Even from this distance, he could see the faint shimmer of the drone's defensive field. He closed his eyes and listened. The wind had its own voice here, a low, restless moan as it pushed against the arena's walls. Beneath it, the faint hum of power lines fed the floodlights, and somewhere deeper, the steady throb of machinery keeping the drone's systems alive. Every sound was a clue. When he returned to the barracks, Elias was waiting with a datapad. "They've confirmed the schedule. You're last to shoot. They want the audience to see every alien fail first. So your miss will be the final punchline. Then we won't give them one," Ghostwind said. That night, while the others slept or argued over strategy, he sat at a small metal table with his notebook open. Lines of numbers filled the pages, interspersed with rough sketches of the arena and the drone. He calculated bullet drop in Vary's IV's gravity, estimated the wind's effect at varying gust speeds, adjusted for the density of the cold air. Each equation fed into the next until the path of the shot took shape in his mind, a thread through chaos. By the time the first pale light of the Vary's dawn filtered through the frost-covered window, he had closed the book. The storm outside raged without pause, but within its shifting patterns, he had found the narrow window he needed. The competition would begin in hours. Elias stirred from his bunk and saw Ghostwind already dressed, rifle slung over his shoulder. "You ready?" he asked. Ghostwind's answer was calm, almost casual. "I've been ready since they left." And with that, he stepped out into the cold, walking toward the place where every voice in the galaxy would soon fall silent. The storm had not eased. Snow scoured the arena in endless waves, carried by winds that shrieked through the gaps in the seating towers. The floodlights blazed down, their beams refracting into shifting halos in the blizzard. Despite the cold, the stands were full. Wrapped in heavy coats and thermal gear, spectators from a dozen worlds leaned forward, eager to see the galaxy's marksmen prove themselves, or fail spectacularly. Hollow drones floated above the arena, broadcasting every movement to millions watching from orbit and beyond. At the far end of the field stood the target, an Erevos-class war drone, its armor matte black and angular, every surface designed to deflect incoming fire. Small vents along its sides exhaled faint streams of vapor into the freezing air. Every few seconds, its plating shifted minutely, rearranging to conceal its vulnerable core. Overhead, invisible emitters generated localized turbulence, forcing the wind into chaotic patterns. Even standing still, it radiated menace. The announcer's voice rose above the wind, amplified through the arena's sound system. Competitors, today you face a true challenge. One shot only at a target no army has ever brought down in a single strike. Fail, and the galaxy will remember your miss more than your name. The crystalline alien's grin widened as the crowd rumbled with anticipation. We begin. One by one, the competitors stepped forward. A Trashian with 6 eyes and a plasma rifle the length of his arm was first. He sighted through a glowing scope, waited for the wind to calm, then unleashed a searing bolt of green light. It struck the drones, plating with a flash, but failed to breach, the armor dispersing the energy harmlessly. The crowd offered polite applause, but the announcer's tone carried a note of smugness. Next came a Sithri sharpshooter, her movements swift and precise. She fired a beam of concentrated particle energy, cutting a glowing path through the storm. It curved unexpectedly just before impact, scattering into harmless sparks against the drone's shield. Her jaw tightened, but she bowed to the audience before stepping away. Competitor after competitor tried. Railguns, coil rifles, ion lances, but the results were the same. The wind betrayed them. The armor turned their shots, or the defensive field shimmered and absorbed the blow. The spectators began to murmur, some glancing toward the human sitting silently at the far edge of the competitor's line. Ghostwind had not moved during any of the previous attempts. He sat on a low bench, his rifle resting across his knees, his gloved hands folded loosely. The hood of his weather-shielded jacket was pulled low, shadowing his eyes. To those watching closely, it seemed as though he wasn't studying the competition at all. His gaze remained fixed on the distant drone, as if he were memorizing its breathing. When the final alien before him stepped down, the announcer's tone shifted, theatrical and heavy with condescension. And now, for our final challenger. Representing the quaint blue world of Earth, a man known only as Ghostwind. Will he fare better than his predecessor, or will history repeat itself? The crowd's laughter was muted but present, a low undercurrent beneath the howling wind. Ghostwind rose, lifting his rifle with practiced ease. The weapon looked unremarkable compared to the alien armaments. No glowing energy coils, no sleek alloy casing, just a long, matte barrel and a sturdy wooden stock darkened by age and use. He walked with unhurried steps to the firing line, boots crunching in the packed snow. Elias stood a few meters behind, arms folded, his eyes fixed on a man's back. He knew better than to speak now. This was Ghostwind's world, and any interruption would only disrupt the fragile focus that defined him. Ghostwind knelt, setting the rifle before him. He did not immediately raise it to his shoulder. Instead, he pulled off one glove and let his bare fingers touch the snow, feeling its grain, its weight. He brought his hand to his lips briefly, tasting the cold. Then he turned his head slightly, closing his eyes as the wind battered against his cheek. His breathing slowed. He reached into his coat pocket and retrieved the small, weathered notebook, its pages filled with calculations written in tight, neat script. Flipping to the correct page, he scanned the figures, then adjusted the rifle's scope with careful, incremental turns. The crowd shifted restlessly, wondering why he wasn't firing. The announcer's voice dripped with mockery. Perhaps the human needs more time to remember how to operate his projectile device. A ripple of laughter passed through the stands. Ghostwind didn't react. Through the scope, the world narrowed to a single, distant point. The drone loomed at the far end of the range, partially obscured by the curtain of blowing snow. The wind shifted again, a sharp cross-gust from the left, followed by a brief lull. Ghostwind waited, counting the seconds between gusts, noting the rhythm buried within the chaos. He exhaled slowly and brought his finger to the trigger. The wind roared in his ears, then eased for the span of a heartbeat. In that window, the shot broke. The crack of a rifle was sharp and clean, swallowed almost instantly by the storm. For an instant, nothing seemed to happen. Even the hollow drones struggled to track the small, spinning bullet as it curved through the distorted air currents. Then, in a sudden, almost anticlimactic moment, the war drone jerked. A hairline fracture appeared along one seam of its plating, right where a panel had shifted open for an instant. The fracture widened, and a puff of vapor burst from within. The drone toppled sideways, its internal systems collapsing in silence. The arena was utterly still. No cheers, no jeers, only the muffled wail of the wind. It was as though every spectator was trying to process what they had just seen. On the hollow screens, slow-motion replays zoomed in on the moment the bullet passed through a gap scarcely wider than a coin, striking the drone's exposed power core dead center. The shot had threaded the needle, traveling an impossible arc through the storm without being deflected. The announcer's crystalline face had lost its grin. His voice, when it returned, was softer, lacking its earlier swagger. Target destroyed. One shot. Ghostwind rose, slinging the rifle over his shoulder. He didn't bow, didn't wave to the crowd. He simply turned and walked back toward the competitor's line, passing the stunned alien marksman without a word. Elias stepped forward as he approached, eyes wide. He stopped himself, the rest of the sentence unnecessary. Ghostwind's gaze was calm, almost indifferent, as though he had done nothing remarkable. Behind them, the silence in the stands began to break, not with applause, but with a kind of hushed murmuring. Spectators leaned toward one another, their voices low. In the commentary box, the announcer struggled to frame what had just happened. Across the galaxy, those watching the broadcast replayed the shot again and again, trying to understand how a man with an antique rifle had succeeded where the most advanced weaponry had failed. Ghostwind didn't look back at the target. The shot was finished, the mission complete. For him, there was no need to dwell on it. Every shot was a decision made, an action taken, and once it left the barrel, it belonged to history, not to him. As he stepped off the field, the wind picked up again, howling across the arena. The floodlights cast long shadows across the snow, the broken drone lying in the distance like the carcass of some long-defeated beast. The murmurs in the stands would grow into stories, and the stories into legend. But in that moment, the only sound that mattered was the wind and the absence of laughter. The officials conferred in hurried tones, their expressions tight. The rules of the challenge had been clear. The human had succeeded. By right, Earth would claim its victory and the concessions promised by the Marksman's Accord. The announcer cleared his throat, preparing to address the audience again, but the words seemed to stick. Elias glanced once more at the man beside him, realizing the depth of the silence he had created. It wasn't only the crowd here on Varys 4. Somewhere, in every corner of the galaxy, voices that had once mocked were now still. And in that stillness, the weight of the shot began to sink in. Ghostwind adjusted the strap of his rifle and kept walking toward the exit tunnel. The next part of this story would unfold beyond the arena, in negotiation halls and council chambers. But that was not his concern. His work here was done, and the galaxy would not forget the moment it stopped to listen to nothing at all. The war drone's smoking remains still lay half buried in the snow when the first voices broke the stunned quiet. They were low at first, uncertain, the murmurs of beings who had just witnessed something they could not easily explain. The announcer's amplified voice returned in a clipped tone, naming the victor according to the rules of the Marksman's Accord, but the grandeur was gone. His crystalline face betrayed nothing, yet there was no mistaking the tightness in his words. Across the arena, the alien dignitaries exchanged looks, their earlier amusement replaced with a measure of respect and something colder, calculation. Ghostwind stood at the edge of the competitor's platform, the rifle resting against his shoulder. His breath plumed in the cold air, steady as when he had arrived. Elias came to his side, still shaking his head. "You understand what you just done?" he asked quietly. Ghostwind's eyes flicked toward the distant drone. "I ended the conversation," he said. Then he turned toward the exit. Beyond the arena, the diplomatic sector of Varys 4 was already in motion. Messages flew across encrypted channels, summoning alliance representatives to an emergency council. The rules of the challenge were binding. Earth's victory meant trade concessions, equal representation in certain military decisions, and the right to refuse advisory oversight from the Alliance's larger member states. For years, Earth had been little more than a tolerated newcomer on the galactic stage. Now it was a recognized force, thanks to one bullet and a man who preferred silence to ceremony. Inside the council chamber, the atmosphere was brittle. Representatives of rival worlds struggled to hide their irritation, some leaning back in their chairs with crossed arms, others whispering in their own languages. Admiral Harada sat at the head of Earth's delegation, her expression an impassive mask. When a Velrothi trade minister attempted to downplay the significance of the shot, Harada leaned forward, her voice like ice. Your rules. Your choice of target. One shot. One kill. I expect the same respect you'd give any victor. There was no argument to that. The accords were ancient, and violating them would fracture the alliance more than any one member was worth. The minister inclined his crystalline head, conceding with the formality of a man swallowing a bitter fruit. Ghostwind was not in the chamber to see it. He had declined an invitation to attend, instead walking the quieter service corridors of the station. To him, victory was measured in the absence of a follow-up shot, not in titles or contracts. The station's maintenance staff, many of whom had seen the broadcast, stepped aside for him without speaking. Some nodded. A few stared openly, perhaps expecting him to bask in their admiration. He didn't. In a small, empty observation deck overlooking the frozen plains, Ghostwind stood alone. Through the glass, the lights of the arena burned against the storm, the broken drone still visible as a dark scar on the ice. His reflection in the glass looked almost like a stranger, just another soldier in a heavy coat, eyes shadowed, gear worn from use. Elias found him there after the council had adjourned. They signed everything, he said, a hint of wonder in his voice. Trade routes, defense pacts, even tech exchanges. You've changed Earth's standing in one day. Ghostwind didn't turn from the window. I didn't change it. I reminded them we belong here. You could take credit, Elias said, leaning against the bulkhead. You could stand in front of the cameras and make a speech. People back home would want to hear from you. That's not my work, Ghostwind replied. I take the shot when it matters. After that, the talking is for others. Elias studied him for a moment. They'll never mock Earth like that again. They'll find something else, Ghostwind said. But next time, they'll look twice before laughing. In the days that followed, the story spread across the galaxy, told and retold in bars, on transport ships, in military academies. The details shifted with each telling. Some claimed Ghostwind could see through the snow, others that he had somehow bent the wind to his will, but the core never changed. One shot, one kill against impossible odds. In human cities, his image appeared on walls and in news feeds, though few knew his real name. On alien worlds, his feat was dissected in tactical forums, studied by instructors who had once dismissed Earth's methods as primitive. The respect came grudgingly in some quarters. There were whispers that the shot had been luck, that the drone had been damaged beforehand, that some unseen hand had tilted the balance. But no one could deny the replay footage, slowed to show the precise instant the bullet threaded the gap in the armor. Whatever they thought of the man, the skill was undeniable. On the final day before departure, Admiral Harada met Ghostwind in the shuttle bay. You've given us more than a victory, she said. You bought us breathing room. Use it well, and Earth could stand as an equal in the Alliance within a decade. He gave a faint nod, but there was no triumph in his eyes. Breathing room doesn't last forever. She almost smiled. I suppose you'll be around when we need another shot taken? If it matters, he said simply, and stepped past her into the shuttle. The return journey was quieter. Elias tried once or twice to engage him in conversation, but Ghostwind spent most of the trip cleaning the rifle, oiling the mechanisms, and storing it with the care of someone sealing away a trusted tool. He never spoke of the drone, the arena, or the crowd. When Elias finally asked why, Ghostwind only said, because the next shot is the only one that matters now. When they landed on Earth, the reception was already waiting, officials, cameras, and a crowd that spilled across the landing platform. Harada gave speeches, dignitaries shook hands, and the anthem played. Ghostwind disembarked last, moving through the crowd like a shadow, nodding politely when addressed, but never stopping. By the time the speeches ended, he was gone, vanished into the city streets with his rifle case in hand. In the weeks that followed, Elias would occasionally catch news of him, not in official channels, but in rumors. A security officer on a remote mining station swore he had seen him in a supply depot. A smuggler claimed Ghostwind had been aboard a ship heading into uncharted sectors. No one could confirm anything, and perhaps that was the way he wanted it. Somewhere, on a cold night far from Earth, a man sat with a rifle across his lap, looking out over an unfamiliar horizon. The wind there would have its own voice, the stars their own patterns, but the work was the same: measure, adjust, wait. On Varys 4, the broken remains of the war drone were moved into a museum, labeled as the target in the silencing shot. Visitors stood before it, studying the small, precise hole in its armor. Guides told the story with the reverence of fable. Even those who scoffed at Earth's place in the Alliance would sometimes pause in front of that display, imagining the moment the bullet had found its path through chaos. And across the galaxy, the phrase entered the shared vocabulary of soldiers and civilians alike. One shot that silenced a galaxy. It was a reminder, a warning, and for some, an aspiration. Ghostwind never claimed it as his own. For him, it was just another job completed. But in the quiet places between the stars, where wind and silence ruled, the legend of that single shot lingered. Proof that sometimes, in a universe of noise and blinding light, the deadliest force was the man who needed neither applause nor explanation.